Welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hey, Susan.
Hi, Guthrie. How are you today?
I am doing just fine. Just fine. We are reaching the end of our lecture series.
We have two more.
Two more.
This one and then one more.
Yep.
Although we might do something like this again.
We reserve the right to talk or do anything we want at any time.
We reserve the right to make our audience suffer.
That's right. If you're suffering, why are you listening?
I guess I need a more optimistic attitude about this.
Yeah, I guess so.
We reserve the right to enlighten our audience with all of this wonderful knowledge. How's that? Is that better?
That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
I like that. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So we have two more in our series, and we're going to introduce the topic in a moment. And today's is going to be like an introduction to that topic, and then the last one we do in the series will be more of a deep dive into the same topic. Right?
That's right.
And what's the topic, Guthrie?
So the topic is we're trying to do something more grounded than conceptual models. Though that
was our last two series. That was very conceptual, abstract.
So we're talking about behavioral design.
Yep.
And I want to talk about the intersection, the confluence of it's kind of like a service design or marketing. Marketing design sort of sounds wrong, but that's sort of what it is. And UX.
Right. We want to talk about this intersection where the UX designers are designing things, but the marketing people are having a big say as to,
or service design or product design.
Right. Because we're talking about behavioral design. So where the product side or the marketing side of the organization has a lot of things they want people to do. They are kind of directing the behavior they're looking for, and they're asking for the UX designer to design for that.
Yeah. So we should set this up. The designer, we're just assuming. So, they sort of want to make things easy for the user.
They want to meet the user's needs. Yeah. That's our assumption.
Yeah, that's the assumption. But that's not always the business goal.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of times the business has a particular behavior they're looking for.
Right. So the first sort of part then that you can maybe talk about is how does this usually happen, right? So for example, if I go to American Airlines, there'll be a banner that says, click here to sign up for the new American Airlines Visa card.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, that's not in the best interest of the user.
Not necessarily. Could be.
Let's assume,
but not
that
necessarily.
For most people, it's not.
If we mapped out the task analysis of what the particular user is coming to the website to do, probably high up on the list is, book a flight or something. And probably high up on the list is not, I really want to sign up for an American Airlines credit card. And yet that might be very prominent at the website, at the top of the website, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So somebody besides the designer is likely setting that as a goal.
And we sort of talked about before when we've talked about a lot of app stuff, and you hate features. Design.
Well, I don't hate features. I mean, I use features all the time.
But design for using features as a design criteria,
as your roadmap of what you're gonna work on in design.
Like we need to design it this way so that we can have.
We want to design a feature. Well, even just deciding what the feature, even just the list of important features. I just don't like thinking about design from a feature point of view. because to me, it's all about the user and what the user's trying to do. And it is true. I mean, Guthrie, look, when you're doing design work, really, in reality, you are at the intersection of what the user wants and needs, and what the business wants and needs, and what the technology opportunities and constraints are. I mean, those are the three, you draw the Venn diagram, and those are the three things, and the stuff in the middle is what you actually need to go design. And so I think it sets up I think inherent in that is tension. If you're saying that the designer piece, the user experience designer piece, that person, the UX designer, is supposed to be an advocate for usability and satisfaction and delight and all that other stuff, there's an inherent tension, because there is a portion of what the business side wants and what the technology can do and can't do that is at odds with what the user's trying to do. And that's reality. So as a designer, you often end up in this kind of weird place, where you're asked to design things. And we're not even talking about, designing things that aren't ethical, right? I mean, that's a whole nother topic that you and I have personally been asked to do. Luckily, very rarely. But there are stories that I can tell about times when we've been asked to do things that we've declined to do because we felt they were unethical. There were a couple times before you joined the business, Guthrie, where I was asked to do things that I actually happen to know were illegal in the U.S. based on, because I had done work with the Federal Trade Commission, and this one client was asking me to do things that I actually knew were illegal, and I said that to them, and they looked panic stricken. I don't know if they were panic stricken because they were found out, or because they didn't know that what they were planning on doing was illegal. But anyway, they didn't hire me. But we're not talking about that. We're just talking about design for particular behavior.
Right.
That the business side or usually it's the business side wants. So, okay. So what about this then? We've established the context.
Okay. So what's, to you, how do you think these decisions in companies happen? How do you, what's sort of the process by which you end up getting in the middle of the site, a large banner ad for a credit card?
I was in a meeting this morning, actually, in which the discussion was about, making sure that the plans that the UX group and the technology group had about this product and the design and decisions and so on were whether there was support from the business side. So part of how these decisions get made or who gets to make them depends on the organization, the particular structure of that company or organization, and who has power and who has the money, right? So very typically at a website, if we're talking about a website, then the marketing part of the organization is often very powerful, and they're making the decisions, and they say maybe they've decided this, or they hired a consultant who has said, look, we're going to do a campaign, right? So the business has decided, we'll just keep using the airlines example. The business has decided that having people get an American Airlines, sorry, American, for using you as an example, this would be true for any of the airlines, that if people get an airline credit card, the airline is going to make a lot of money. Typically, branded credit cards like this, they make a lot of money. That's why they do it. That's why there are so many of these. So they've decided that this would be great. This would be a way of bringing in revenue that is tangential to people buying airline tickets. And, they want to do it. And so they are calling the shots, and they turn to whoever is doing design. Again, it might be an outside company, it might be inside designers. And they say, we want to put a big banner at the top of the page. And then it happens. I don't know. That's a complicated question. Am I answering the question you asked?
Okay. No. Yeah, that's good. So what's interesting is I think the way that a designer would talk about behavior is a little different than someone in marketing or someone in service design, because, like I said, there are business motivations, and so how that's translated isn't, designers often, it ends up with an interface, for better or for worse, right? Like that's usually
right. You have a product or you have a website. I mean, you have an interface that the customer or user is going to be interacting with
in some capacity,
right? And that's how you are putting across your service that you're trying to get people to sign up for. That's the behavior. Mm-hmm.
Right. Whereas the kind of goal of if you're designing, doing service design, or if you're doing, trying to get people to sign up for this or that. I mean, it's just a very different, world, very different. You may not end up with an interface. It may not kind of go in that way. It may be more of like a campaign, if that makes sense,
Yeah, but I think this is an interesting point, Guthrie, that you raised, because I mean, there is a very direct relationship between a campaign and an interface, and these days, because a lot of campaigns are digital, they by necessity imply an interface, and interestingly, they often imply making changes to an interface that already exists for a different purpose. Right. So it's not just that the airlines is going to create a special web page just to sell credit cards. Right. They could do that. They're probably not going to do that. I mean, there are specialized landing pages for things, for campaigns, but very typically you're trying to swoop people from, they're visiting the website and you're trying to grab their attention from the purpose that they went to that website and divert them to the campaign. So I would say, 75% of the time, if there's some kind of campaign, it's going to have an impact on the main interface that was not designed for that campaign.
Right. Right. So when you're talking about just generally the options at the disposal of trying to get this behavioral stuff to do to work, to do things, what most companies go to rewards, I think. What are I mean, is that do you think that's true when it comes to trying to get people to do various things? I suppose it's not. I suppose marketing is usually not rewards. I can never tell. I don't know what marketing is. What they're using.
This is not a marketing podcast for good reason, because
for good
you
reason.
And I are the first people that will admit that we are not marketers.
Yeah, for sure.
And we do not know that world very well. I mean, I would have to say a lot of our clients are marketers. and are in marketing. But that's not, we are not.
That's not
Anyway, what was your question, Guthrie?
So my question is, what are the, I mean, you've talked about how UX uses the different types of motivations to
Right.
get people
We've
to do
talked
stuff when it
about,
comes to
and there are 7 motivators that I talk
behavioral
about.
design.
Right.
Does
Right.
that apply when you move outside the UX world? Does there need to be like a translation layer?
Well, okay. All right. So we talk about the 7 motivators of human behavior. And in behavioral design, we talk about, possibly using those as levers to get people to take the action you want them to take. And things like the desire for mastery, the use of stories and self-stories, rewards, habits, and so on. Now, if we're talking about, if you're asking, hey, is that the same, does that apply when you're talking about getting them to take a UX-based action versus a marketing-based action? The same things apply, because these are those 7 things are not motivators about UX. Those are just human motivation, what gets people to take action. So, yeah, the same things apply, yes. But it's interesting, Guthrie, with, because the example, right? How can I get you to sign up for the credit card? Or how can I get you to join and become a member, right?
Sure.
That's another common one that happens. So, or sign up for marketing emails, right? Although they won't phrase it that way, though.
No.
I don't know how they phrase it. Well, maybe they do phrase it that way. And I don't think those are rewards.
Right. They don't feel like rewards.
Well, because I use a pretty narrow definition of reward, right? I mean, to me, a reward is based on operant conditioning from the B.F. Skinner's research. And so we're talking about what are we going to do in order to increase the incidence of a behavior? That's a reward. And if you give people, if you sign up for the credit card, you're going to get a 5% discount on your flights. You're going to get, right, you're going to get access to the American Airlines lounges at the airports, right? I mean, these are all benefits, but it's not like we're doing that in order to increase the incidence of behavior. Because there's just one behavior, is signing up for the credit card. It's not like, oh, and by doing these things, we'll get you to sign up for the credit card, 5 times a month. No, that's not right. So to me, those aren't really rewards. That's a negotiation.
It's a negotiation.
Yeah, it's a benefit negotiation. I'm just trying to talk you into whether it's worth it to take this action. It's a negotiation. It's not a reward. I don't think of it as a reward. In my view of psychology, it's not a reward.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. So there's this negotiation.
Yeah.
And how do UXers, like the question is, how are UXers supposed to design for this negotiation that they don't really have a conversation with? Like, we don't often in the UX world talk about, hey, like having a negotiation with a user. Like this is just not language that you hear very often. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So UXers are being asked to do this stuff. How do you translate that? How do you deal with this part of behavioral design?
Yeah. So to me, the whole and maybe this is a cop out. To me, the whole negotiation part, like, is it worth it for me to get this credit card? Is this a good thing for me? Right?
Yes.
That is this is interesting. I think it's outside the realm of what I do as a behavioral designer and a UX person. I will tell you what is inside the realm. If we're talking about behavioral design, I think what is inside the realm is the question of what can we do at this part of the web page to encourage people to notice the campaign and offer we have, to encourage people to click on the button that says learn more. Like what are the things that we can do to get that behavior? It's a very specific behavior. We want people to click on the link when they come to the website. That's the piece that I think is involved in behavioral design and UX. The whole other question about is this a good deal for me and all of that, to me, that's not that's a separate world, and that's not what I would deal with UX or behavioral design. But maybe that's just me trying to get out of doing that work. Well, I can just say, well, it's not what I do.
Well, and yet, I mean, UXers have to do this kind of stuff.
I don't know that they do. I think that, no, I think the UXers should not be putting together the campaign and deciding whether giving people access to the lounges and a 5% discount on the airlines, is that enough?
Oh, but okay, they don't have to put that together, but they're told, hold on, well, we have to put this feature in. Like you need to put this banner or this thing.
Definitely. That is absolutely what the UX person is asked. So in that regard, then I think, so now we get to the interesting place where the UX person, it's a question of what's important to your stakeholder, whoever that is, about this page. So, my question would be, I can change this page so that the most important thing that people need to do is press on the learn more button about the credit card. If that's what you want me to do, if everyone is in agreement that is we talk, Guthrie, about micro moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what is the most important thing that you want someone to do on this page? You want this persona to do on this page. And if you're telling me the most important thing is that they push on that learn more button, then, I can design for that. I might push back and tell you that I think you're giving that too much weight. And what about the most important thing being that people book a trip? Like, because now we have a mismatch between what the user's trying to do and what the organization wants them to do. And that happens a lot. So, as a user advocate, if my research shows that, 90% of the time people are trying to check out booking a flight, I might have the guts to push back on you when you want me to take over the entire top half of the page with the marketing campaign offer. Or, I mean, the worst offender this way, Guthrie, is the pop-up.
That's it. Now that's an ancient technology.
Yeah, that's back. It's like,
yeah, it is back.
It's back. And I really want to note here. All right, so I'm torn about the pop-up thing because half of me says, it's a really bad idea, and it's annoying as heck. I love it when they make it hard to find or click on the close button. Like where the close button, the ad comes up and the close button doesn't come up for another 4 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
It's like so manipulative, and I find them extremely annoying. But the other half of me says, do people have data on this? I mean, I'm guessing, but I could be wrong. I wish I were wrong. That it's extremely effective.
Right.
That the data shows that when you do this, people click on it. I mean, I hope there's data. I don't want there to be data that shows that works, and yet I want there to be data because I don't want it. What's worse? What's worse, that humans will click on the darn thing, or that the organization is continuing to do this even though there isn't any data to support it? I don't know which is the worst situation. Yeah. So, from a UX user advocate point of view, no, I don't like it. But, one could do research, and one can find out how annoyed are people by it versus how much is it making people actually click on, and take the behavior you're desiring. And then somebody in this organization has to make a decision. Is the benefit of the annoyance worth it? Is the annoyance, it's an interesting problem, because you may, how many people are clicking on it. You don't know how many people have decided they're not going to come to you anymore because they're tired of that darn pop-up. And you have no way of knowing that. So, and maybe you don't care. That's the part that's so sad, Guthrie. They just don't care. But, you've heard, I mean, I care. And you've heard me talk about, UX is dead. UX is going downhill. And it's these all add to this. You caught me in a dark mood today, Guthrie.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be so negative. But it's a really good question about I think in a lot of organizations, the assumption is that the UX person, and, there's a conflation of UX and UI, that the person designing the interface is just going to do whatever we tell them to do. And if we tell them we want a big banner at the top and we want big buttons, they're going to do that. And I think in a lot of organizations, the assumption is that the UX person doesn't know about behavioral design and won't be able to help you, and won't be able to tell you, for instance, that you should make the button a noun and not a verb. The research shows that people are more likely to take action if you've invoked group identity by using a noun. And, chances are, I think, in the modern world, the user interface designer is told what button to use, what color to make it, and what the word should say. And so if the user interface designer has knowledge in behavioral design, they may not even be asked to express that knowledge. But that's the cynical me.
So then how would you suggest that behavioral design is instituted? Like at its core, if I waved a magic wand and said, okay, you're CEO.
Okay, that's dangerous. Wait a minute, I am a CEO.
Oh yeah, you are. of a large organization.
Of a large organization, like an airline.
Okay,
that's
hilarious. You were scared of being CEO, and you literally are.
And then I realized I am CEO.
Yeah. So where we're talking about behavioral design.
Yeah.
So who would you have be in charge of that? How would you be the mediator of the negotiation between other departments and the way they would just set things up, and the UX team or the engineering team or whatever, and using behavioral design? Because you teach a whole course about behavioral design. Normally this lecture series is behavioral design adjacent, and the whole point, and it's sort of geared towards UXers. So
yes.
You're sort of starting with the preamble that behavioral design should be in the realm of UX. Would you stick to that?
I think that behavioral design is a whole field unto itself, regardless of UX.
Sure. That's fair.
You and I even do behavioral design consulting work that doesn't have anything to do with designing screens, right?
Fair.
So I would say that. But in the realm of behavioral design and UX, I believe I would say, and this is just my view of the world, so I would say that the best situation for all involved would be that the UX people are aware of and knowledgeable about behavioral design, and that they know how to use it within whatever it is they're designing. And part of that is so part of that type of behavioral design, we're doing it from a UX point of view, is behavioral design. Yes, we want people to take a certain action, but we don't want to put that higher than what the user's trying to do. There's what the user's trying to do, there's what the organization is trying to get the user to do. Those are not always the same thing. When they are the same thing, that's so wonderful, right? So everybody wants the user to go book some airline tickets. Yay. The UX people want that. The organization wants that. We can come together. We can use behavioral design and then also just best practices of UX design to make that happen. And that's wonderful. But sometimes what the user wants to do and what the organization wants them to do is not the same thing. So I do want a UX person to be integrally involved. But like with everything UX, the UX person is not usually in control of this. So it's a discussion. It's you have a stakeholder, and it's typically not you, and it's typically not a UX person. It's someone on the business side, someone on the product side, someone in marketing, someone in engineering. And they have what they want to do. And then you're advocating for the user and what the user wants to do. And you have to evaluate that gap. How big is that gap? How problematic is the gap? So if we do what the stakeholder's asking for, have we now had a large negative impact on the user's experience? And if so, then I think I think to just take a behavioral design point of view on it and say, okay, great, I'll tell you how to design this page so that people will take that action, even though that action is not what the user wants. That's not what they came for. And it's going to, if I take up the whole top of the page with the banner, it's going to interfere with what the user's trying to do. I think the behavioral designer should also take into account that user perspective. So I do think it is a UX/behavioral designer person that should be doing that. I guess I'm just saying it isn't always. A lot of times the stakeholder is playing the role of behavioral designer, and they don't necessarily have a user perspective.
Yeah, well, why would they?
Yeah, I mean, why would they? That's not their job, right?
No, that's right. So would you, if you were a UXer,
which I am,
which you are,
as well as the CEO, as well as a behavioral designer.
I think so. I think UXers are asked to use behavioral design work so rarely. I think they do it. I think there's sometimes that they can do it in fits and starts when the business people don't really have a good idea of what to do. So I found that it makes teaching behavioral design so interesting because teaching behavioral design to UXers is so interesting because while it's useful, I feel like they like a lot of times, unless it's the visual component, because some of the behavioral design, okay, so the behavioral design topics you teach, right? Like vision and the brain, that's something that UX designers do use.
Right.
But I think like a lot of the motivation
ideas about
stuff,
color and shape and size and peripheral vision and all those. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some stuff that obviously directly applies, but I feel like a lot of this stuff, it's sort of like like the UXers are really interested in it. I find when we teach this stuff, and then they'll never use it because like they're just never going to be in charge of setting up the
of
product,
making,
setting
yeah.
up the service, setting
Although,
up the
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
initiatives or the app, like if you're making a
well,
video game, you know,
and
the
we were
little
talking about this just last
rewards
week
and
because we were, if you recall, we were having a discussion about when we taught a series of behavioral design workshops to teams where the product person and the software development person and the UX person came. We had different teams like this, and we taught the workshop to this set of teams, and that, so that would be more ideal, right? Because then you actually have, in that case, for this one client, the people in the room were the ones that would be making these decisions. But yeah, so basically you're telling me that my business plan of teaching workshops for behavioral design to UX people is actually a really bad idea, and I
no.
should scrap it.
No, I mean, I think it's good, but the question is, are they working in those spaces? I mean, in fairness, a lot of times when we teach these stuff, there's people from other departments that
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
multi
I
departmental.
think it depends on it varies, right? I think you're right. There's a lot of UI designers, perhaps, who can make use of some of it, right? Like the part of the workshop that has to do with visual design, as you said. And then there might be other things where, okay, they are not going to be able to influence the frame or the choice architecture or the decision making or the use of stories, or right, the other part of some of the other parts of what we teach. But I still think it's good for them to know. And then I think there are some people who perhaps work on a more UX strategy level who can use a lot of it. So I think it depends. I think it depends on their role in the organization as a UX person.
Okay. So yeah, where should we go now in terms of this conversation?
That's a really good question. So,
There's a couple of places we could pivot.
well, what are my options?
Did you want to add any of the options, or you just gonna use my
No, I'm
option?
asking you for the options.
Okay. Well, part one is, I suppose we could continue to focus on the like behavioral design as a body of knowledge,
Hmm.
and uh, how different parts of an organization should use it.
Hmm.
That's one way we can go. We can focus in on a specific aspect of behavioral design,
Hmm.
and focus further in there. We can talk about the way that the there are other, I guess I would call it, I don't know, methodologies within an organization, and how it's it is hard to design, like how can you design something using a behavioral design methodology, or not a methodology, behavioral design strategies, but doing that within other uh, design frameworks or agile frameworks,
Or design
um,
thinking or
design
something like that.
thinking. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So those are some options.
Oh my goodness, Guthrie, those are three
We can
really
do a
good
part we can do a
options.
part two, and just
Well, we are going to
stop
do a
this here.
part two, but
Yeah.
oh, do you have a preference?
No, I have no preference. No, this is your show. This is your lecture series, as I've said from the beginning.
Well, let's do either one of the first two.
Okay.
Let's pause on number three. Maybe we will adjust some of number three in our next uh, episode. But let's do number one or number two, and now I don't remember what those were.
Well, Number two was just talking about an aspect of behavioral design
Yeah.
that you could do. Number one was to continue to talk about how um, behavioral design sort of is is implemented, is used. That how you can have sort of a, I mean, it's a pretty broad topic. It's like, so so for example, uh, uh, the using behavioral design, um, who does it not apply to? Is it something that should be, organizationally wide? You can talk about that. You can talk about whether the behavioral, um, you know, did like how behavioral design, interacts with a design system. These are
Oh, I'm not going there. All right, let's talk about
yeah.
how behavioral design. Let's talk about get into just some of the details about behavioral design. Like, where does it apply? I'm a UX person, and I'm designing some pages and screens. So if we're going to talk about behavioral design, if we're going to talk about how to use rewards or visual design or what we know about human decision making, all the different things in order to change behavior, that's all the details of it.
Mhm.
But what does that have to do with me
Right.
as a UX person? I'm designing the screens and pages for this product. It might be a website, it might be an app, it might be software. What does this have to do with me? Right? Which I think you were kind of implying. Can we go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure.
So I think the way to think about it is at any given moment on any given screen or page, or could have to do with a voice interaction, right? At any given moment, what is the user trying to do? What do you being the owner of this website, the organization that's doing this product, what do you want them to do? What is that gap? And what can you, as a UX/UI designer, do to make it more likely that someone's going to take that desired action at that point? And to me, that's at the heart of behavioral design. So, one of the things I try and get across to people is behavioral design is quite specific. I think it's not just like, oh, we're going to do good user interface design. Well, that's really broad and general, and there are like 5,000 things that go into that, right? No, in this case, we're talking about the users right here, and they're doing this thing, and they're trying to accomplish this task, and the organization wants them to take this particular action. What can we do to make it more likely that they will? Right? And I think if you're going to apply behavioral design, you have to start to think more at that micro moment level. And to me, that's what's different about behavioral design from other UX design. So, for instance, Guthrie, the last two episodes that we recorded about mental models and conceptual models and objects and views and all of that, it was very conceptual and it was very high level. And it wasn't about micro moment design. It was the opposite. It's macro design, right? It's making decisions that are going to permeate within the whole product and influence the whole task flow. And that is not what we're talking about here. When you're talking about behavioral design, you're talking about, okay, what are we going to do right at this moment? How should we design that page so that people will press that button or click on that link or finish the process that they're doing. What is the wording we can use that will motivate them? What, the visual design aspects we were talking about, so it's very, very specific. And I think that's one of the major differences to me between behavioral design and general UX design is that specificity in moment and place.
Which is certainly different than the priorities of other parts of the organization that doesn't really care about moment and place. That's like a metric, because that's not like a very, like, moment and place is not very metric.
No, I would say the opposite.
Oh, you think it's the opposite?
Yeah, I think it's the opposite. In fact, one of the reasons when we were talking in our last episode about, the difficulty of doing the object view and the conceptual model design. I mean, one of the reasons I think that's so difficult is that is not very metric oriented and it's hard to wrap your head around. Whereas in this case, we're talking about, we can measure, we can do A/B testing and measure that with this design, twice as many people press that button. So making the button wording be a verb was more effective, or showing an image of food on the counter in the kitchen when we were trying to, sell cabinet facing. That worked better than not having the image of food. And we know that would be true because we know that food grabs attention and so on. So that's very metric oriented. I think behavioral design is extremely metric oriented. And I think it's a good idea to be that specific.
Okay. So if you if you disagree with me and say it is metric oriented, is it regular metrics? Is it weirdo behavioral design metrics?
Wait a minute. What's regular metrics and what's weirdo behavioral design?
Regular metrics that I've heard of, clicks, views.
I think it's regular metrics. It's regular metrics.
Okay. So there's no special secret behavioral design metrics?
No. What's special and secret is what we are doing in order to make that metric happen. That's the secret sauce.
The secret sauce. Did we ever determine if it was secret sauce or magic sauce?
It's secret sauce, isn't it?
I mean, there's not a right or wrong answer.
I don't know. I guess it depends on what you're talking about. Yeah. I think it's really important when you're doing behavioral design work to try and get that specific. That's how will you know that the behavioral design ideas that we are suggesting get put into place? How will we know they're successful? And the reason that's useful is not just because then you can prove you were successful, which is always useful.
Right.
But it gets very specific about what is it you want here, to the stakeholder. What is it you want to have happen? Now, sometimes, I mean, I'm thinking of a particular client we had that they were so specific. Again, and this kind of goes back to the airline credit card thing, that, okay, I can design the page so that that's what people do, but that's really what you want? You really don't care about anything else? Because, do you remember you said just put a big red button on?
Just make the whole screen one enormous button.
One gigantic button. If that's really the only thing you care about. Yeah. So, but I think it's important to sometimes clients are very clear on what they want when they want behavioral design. And a lot of times they're not, because they're not used to thinking this way. So I think it's really useful. If we measured, how do you define success? I think that's an important question. And if we were going to measure it, what is it we would measure, and how would we measure it? And I guess I think, it's interesting, Guthrie, because when you're talking about if we talk about behavioral design versus just, quote, regular UX design, behavioral design is for a particular goal. UX design should probably be for a particular goal also, but sometimes the goal of UX design is, it's like, well, we need an interface, It doesn't have to be particularly usable. It doesn't have to motivate people to take a particular, but we need something on the screen, we got to collect some data and we got to go to the next step. And so I think sometimes that's why you end up with, mishmash screens and pages, because there wasn't any clear goal and somebody just wanted a screen. I don't think that's a good way to design, but I think that happens a lot. It is a really, yes, and in this day and age, I think it's a really important consideration. Are we designing screens and pages with a particular goal in mind? And what is that goal? And is it to optimize the user experience? Is it to optimize the user experience and see if we can get people to take a particular behavior? Is it, we don't care about optimizing the user experience. We don't really care about the behavior. We just need screens and pages. I think those are valid questions. And as a UX designer, I think some of the frustration that UX designers have is that they are trying to do either optimize for the user experience or optimize for a particular behavior, and their stakeholder doesn't care about either of those things.
Right. Very common.
That's a problem. I think that's a problem. and I think it is one reason why it's. How many frustrated UX designers do you know, Guthrie? None?
No. I said yeah.
Many, right?
Yeah, of course.
And I think this is one reason why they're frustrated, because really someone just wants them, Like I remember years and years ago, I was laying out the UX strategy for a project, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we'll interview the users, and then we'll do some user testing. And they stopped me and they said, "Wait, why are you going to do all that?" And it's like, "Well, we're designing the interface, right?" And it's like, "Yeah, we're designing the interface." I said, "Well, you want it to be usable, don't you?" And they said, "No, not particularly. We don't care about that. Just we just need the interface." And then I was like,
"How else are people going to get to the features that we want?"
That's right. And I'm so, right? This is like everybody has their own mental model. Coming back to mental models, my mental model was, of course, you would design the interface so that it is usable and optimizes the user experience. But their mental model was not that at all. It was exactly what you said. No, just design it to get to the features, and people use the features. I think these unspoken expectations are critical, and I think we need to surface them. So when I'm working on a UX project, I want to know, are we just designing screens and pages? Are we trying to design them to optimize user experience, and or are we trying to elicit a particular behavior? And I need to know that as a designer, because I need to know, then if I know the answer to that, I can put together my UX strategy and my behavioral design strategy for the work. So I think that's important to know. And I think that the stakeholders often don't think of it that way, right? And but I just think that's an important educational piece. So if you're going to do behavioral design, Your stakeholders need to know what that means, and that that means you're not just doing standard interface design. And there will be extra steps that will need to be part of the process, that the stakeholder will need to be involved in order for that to happen. So I think that's got to surface early.
Needs to surface early.
Yeah, in the project, because I'm a huge proponent of design strategy, right? Figuring out what you're going to do to get the work done and how you're going to do it, and you need to know what the design goals are in order to put together the strategy. And behavioral design is a separate design goal. So, the question there, the critical question is, as we are designing this thing we're designing, are there very particular behaviors that you want people to take in particular places? And if the answer is yes, then I know I'm going to have to do a behavioral design strategy, not just a UX strategy. And similarly, an analogous question is, are we trying to optimize the user experience?
I think it's amazing that I started by saying we should do something, we'll do something concrete because we did conceptual models.
And then we didn't end up concrete.
And we managed to do something that was even more,
more abstract.
Oh
no.
It's still, it was still pretty abstract,
Okay. So then maybe what we can do, because, this is a 2-part series. And the first part is supposed to be introductory, which I'm hoping this is, even though maybe you think it got too conceptual. And then what we can do in the second part of the series is we're going to do a deep dive. And I would suggest let's do a deep dive into, and you may not agree. And that's okay if you don't agree. I'm willing to hear out what you want to do. But we could do a deep dive into some of the particular behavioral design techniques. But we got to do a deep dive into something. So you have like a day to think about this.
Okay. We will, is there anything else you wanted to add to wrap up this particular podcast?
No, I think this is good. I think hopefully we've given people a sense of how behavioral design is different from regular UX design.
There's a little bit of a windy road today.
Do you think we should start all over?
We're not. That's not happening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's not happening. Again, if you have questions or comments, you can email info@teamdoug.com. Again, we don't have any ads. We do this.
Believe it or not, we do this because we think it's fun. Guthrie, is that true?
Yes, though. Yeah. So so we don't get. I don't think we get paid enough to do any re-records. If at all
okay.
possible.
I was going to say, why are you bringing this up?
We have in the past. There were a couple times when we had to, when like the mic was just
when we had
garbage.
Technical difficulties, right?
Yeah. There's nothing worse than getting everything you want to say off your chest and then having to do it again.
And then it's like, you got to redo that.
Oh,
no.
terrible.
I think we have some ones that we did way do you know what number we're on, Guthrie?
Yes, I do.
What number episode is this?
I think this will be, give or take 1 or 2. I'm not entirely sure. I think this will be 147.
Wow, 147 of these things? Yeah. We are gluttons for punishment. But some of the early ones, I mean, our technology has changed a lot over the years. And in some of the early ones, I think we said we were going to go back and do, and I don't know if we ever redid them.
There have been a couple that we have topics that we have revisited over the years.
Yeah, but not because we had problems with the technology necessarily. Anyway, We probably should
I
consider
promise
redoing
you.
some
I
of them.
promise that you don't even remember at least 100 of the ones that we did.
Whoa, that's a challenge.
That you don't even remember that we did one on a certain topic.
I would answer honestly if you asked me. We should do.
Do you remember the one that we did about progressive design?
You mean like progressive disclosure? Yeah.
Probably.
I
You
think
remember that. You remember
No,
that
I
episode.
just remember the topic.
You remember us talking about flashbulb memories?
Yeah, actually I do.
Mhm. Mhm. Do you remember we did a whole thing on journey maps?
But I believe you.
The whole thing on reading?
I do remember the reading.
Okay. All right, well, maybe
I remember more than you think.
Okay.
I have a pretty good memory.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Guthrie. And we'll continue our topic on behavioral design next time.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.